All right, well, we're going to study chapters roughly 11 to 19. I noticed on the lesson sheet I had 11 to 19, and I was preparing 11 to 21. It'll all come out in the mix here. But at any rate, we're sort of midway through the book of Numbers, having studied Leviticus. Let's just think about some things we mentioned last week in the first part of Numbers, chapters 1 to 10. So a little exercise here, yes or no? The people kept the Passover. That's not a very good statement there, but what would you respond to that? Okay, that's really what we noted last time was, having been at Sinai for a year and having kept the Passover initially when they left from Egypt, they now kept it a second time. And we talked about the folks that were defiled, and so God made an allowance for them by allowing them to partake on the second month instead of the first month. All right, number 2, the people prepared ample provisions for the journey. Okay, I see a no. That's what I had. It doesn't really say, I suppose, but who was providing for them? Yeah, God was providing the manna, and we'll see that in tonight's lesson. Number 3, the men who were capable of fighting in battle were numbered. Yes, and really 2 different times, wasn't it? This first time before they leave Sinai, and then there'll be a second time when they camp across from Canaan after the second generation is ready to enter in. And Collie mentioned last week, was a great thought that let's see if I can remember it. As far as the census, what did you say, Collie, about the census? The first generation? Okay. Okay. So there was a close correspondence, and I think you said something else about that. Okay. All right, yeah, that was the part of the point you made. Yeah, so think about that. 603,550, and maybe it's 548 that didn't enter into the land because Joshua and Caleb did. So that's kind of a bracing thought, isn't it? Yeah, sobering, that's the word I was looking for. Okay, so yes, they were numbered, and we talked last time about what that involved. 20 years and upwards, ready for war, able to go to war, Levites exempted from that. All right, number 4, advanced scouts were sent out to determine the best route to take. Okay, I heard a no. That's what I would put. Now later they do send spies in, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but why did they not really need to send out scouts? God was leading them, okay? This pillar of cloud. Number 5, the location of the tribes in the camp was organized. Yes, and by whom? God had told them how he wanted them to camp. And the inner circle was whom? In the middle is the tabernacle. Inner circle, all the Levites and their families, and then the outer circle are the different tribes, okay? And finally, priestly duties were assigned to transport the tabernacle. Yeah, and that was part of the reason that you've got a lot of these other Levites who are not necessarily priests, but they're taking care of provisions, and certainly when they move from place to place. I didn't have this slide in the section last week, but I found it in some other slides I had. So here are those duties in chapter 4. If you go back in the genealogy, Jacob, Levi is one of his sons, and then his 3 sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And then Amram is a son of Kohath, from whom Aaron comes. And then you've got Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu. And of course, they were killed when they offered this strange fire in the tabernacle. So Eleazar becomes the next high priest, and if we get to that point, we'll study that this evening. And Ithamar is another son. So here are the priests coming from the family of Aaron, all of them Levites, but here are the other families of the Levites, and as we said, they're kind of assigned different responsibilities in terms of providing the tabernacle with what's needed and also in helping to transport it from place to place. All right. Can you name them? Anybody remember our letters here? 2 P's and an R. So let's start with the R. What's the first one up there? It's chapters 1 to 7. Ritual sacrifices, okay. Then chapters 8 to 10 comes the P. Priests are ordained. That's where Nadab and Abihu, chapter 10, offer this strange fire after having been ordained. Then chapters 11 to 15, we go back to the R. Okay. Ritual purity, such things as clean and unclean animals, among other things. And then what's right there in the middle? Yeah, Day of Atonement. All right, then starting back the other way, what balances with the ritual purity? Starts with an M. What kind of purity? Moral purity, okay? And then the priests ordained, what's in chapters 21 and 22? Qualifications of the priests. There are some qualifications given there. And then what balances the ritual sacrifices there at the top? The Passover would be one of them. Ritual feast days or festivals, yeah. Okay? So just to keep us thinking about the structure there is one. It's not just 27 chapters of detail. There's a design to it. What's the theme in Leviticus? We hadn't really stressed this very much, but I suggested one last time. It's kind of repeated in the New Testament. Be what? Holy, for I am holy, okay? One of the places that's said is Leviticus 11, right after all those unclean and clean animals are mentioned. And here he says, okay, you need to be holy, I'm holy. So that includes things like that. 1 Peter 1 and verse 15, be holy in all manner of living, God says, or Peter says to Christians. Okay, so as far as the tabernacle, God wants to be with his people. He gives them limited access because, yes, he's there among them, his presence in the tabernacle, and yet what? Not everybody can go in there. Access is limited, isn't it? So that's kind of sending a message by its very presence there. All right, let's think about Numbers. Last time we said, when we pick up in Numbers, the Israelites have been at Sinai for a year. They're getting ready to go. God has given them a law, a covenant, this relationship. He's given them this place in which his presence is said to dwell, and he's chosen a priesthood who is to mediate between himself and the people. And so now they're getting ready to leave, and those first 10 chapters really have to do, if you think about it, with the preparation involved. How's the camp organized? How is the tabernacle to be moved when we actually start moving? And right at the end there, we didn't really mention chapter 10. It tells us about a couple of trumpets that they were to have that could give different signals, but one of the signals is we're going to pick up and move. So there are ways by which they communicate, and God has given those things to them. So here's our division for the book of Numbers. There are 3 sections that have to do with the places where they were. Mount Sinai at the start, the wilderness of Paran in the middle section, and then finally across from Canaan, the plains of Moab. And between those two, they're traveling from point A to point B, then from point B to point C. And that's where we get some detail in the narrative about what's taking place. So here's a map. I wish those names were bigger, but anyway, you get the lay of the land. So we're going from the south there, traditional place of Mount Sinai, up to Kadesh Barnea, wilderness of Paran. We'll talk about that this evening. And then with this second section, they move after the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. on up across from Canaan. All right, so that map shows you their travel, and the wandering is not so much here, but when they get ready to leave after the wandering, they go around Edom, around Moab, and up to that point before they enter into the land. All right, so a lot going on there, but we're going to collapse this down. We're going to even make it simpler than that. So each of those sections gives us some information. I was thinking on the way here, this is by no means a comprehensive, exhaustive travelogue of everything that happened. We're really given very few details. As far as the 40 years, we're told almost nothing. But what does that tell us about these events that are mentioned? They must be important if these are mentioned above all the, as far as all the things that weren't mentioned. So God is trying to tell his people something as he relays this history to them. Remember, Moses is writing this for the Israelites initially, to us by way of example. So we want to break those down and look at each of those sections. So from Mount Sinai, they're going to go up in order to take the land. And so in chapter 11, let's think about what happens. And what happens right off the bat? Yeah, they start complaining. Chapter 11, verses 1 to 4, we've heard this before. The people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. Now, we're not told right there specifically what those misfortunes might be, but if you drop down to verse 4, the next section, and this is actually another section about a mixed multitude, what are they complaining about there? Yeah, the kind of food they're eating. They don't like their diet. Okay. Do you like a little variety in the meals you eat? I think we all do. We can appreciate where that's coming from. And yet, God's providing for them. And think about all these people out there in the wilderness, and they're complaining. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, okay. Yeah, they wept again, verse 4. Oh, that we had meat to eat, and all these things that we gave up. So, what about that? Does that help us in any way? Do we tend to complain? Yeah, we do, despite examples like these. Why do we complain? Yeah, similar reasons. Not satisfied with the way things are. Anything else?
This group here seems to over and over again want to feel like they're a victim rather than that they have God on their behalf.
Okay.
God's looking out for them, and time and time again they go so far, so extreme in their reaction to it. They're just act like children, really.
Okay. So, there is kind of a tedium to all this. I mean, do we ever get kind of bored with the tedium of life? Do you ever feel that way? Like, everything's just like it always is? Well, what's good for us to remember if things are like that? Yeah. Just think of how we've been blessed. I mean, are there some things about life that make it like that we're going through the same routines, that we're doing things over and over? Of course there are. And sometimes life is very hard and very difficult. And there are struggles and there are challenges. And yet we have to look and think about what God has done for us. Well, on this occasion, God is obviously upset up there in verse 1. His anger kindled, the fire of the Lord burns among them and consumes them before it finally dissipates. And so there is that instance, and then there's this complaint about the food that they're eating. And Moses reacts how down in starting at verse 10? Moses isn't very happy. Okay. Yeah, he seems to really be upset about this. I mean, some rather strong language. And he says to God, why have you dealt this way with your servant? Did I conceive these people? Did I give birth to them? And you're saying to me, you carry them like a nurse would carry a nursing child. So he seems to be a little bit at the end of his rope. And so that's certainly a possibility, isn't it? We're human beings. We understand what that's like. And he says, I'm not able to carry this people alone. The burden's too heavy for me. So what does God do in response to that? Okay. Yeah, one of the things he does is he offers some help to Moses. And Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, back in Exodus 18, had kind of suggested a similar thing. So here are 70 men chosen, verse 16. And they come to take him, they stand with him. And verse 17, I will take some of the spirit that's on you and put it on them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you. Okay? So, any lesson there for us? What's that? God hears, okay. Anything else? We ever get overwhelmed, Ian? Many hands make light work, Ian says. That's exactly right. So sometimes we do get overwhelmed. Sometimes we do need help. Sometimes we find ourselves crying out for help. And so certainly we want to ask God for help, and we can ask others for help. And so God supplies some help in the form of these others. And in addition to that, he tells the people to get ready because there's going to be meat to eat. They want something else to eat. Let me go back here. And he's going to provide it for them. So how does that turn out? Yeah, careful what you ask for, because he brings in the quail from the sea, and the people start, seems like, excitedly gathering it all up and eating it, only to find that as they're eating it, God strikes them with a plague. All right, so I think he's trying to teach them a lesson that, yeah, he can provide, but that they have to live within the bounds of what he's providing for them. Okay? And then in addition to this, we've got verses 24 down through verse 30 about these men who are helping. And 2 men are Eldad and Medad, it says. The Spirit rests on them, and Joshua seems to want to keep them from prophesying. And what's Moses' response to that? Down in verse 29. Kind of sounds like Jesus on one occasion when someone said that someone was out doing some work. Okay. If it's God's Spirit working in them, then why would we keep them from doing the work he wants them to do? And so that's valid in terms of thought there. Okay, anything else about those examples in chapter 11 that you thought about as you went through there? Well, yeah, go ahead.
Would they have gotten, would the plague have happened had they gone to Moses, used some of the elders that had been assembled, or gone to the priests and asked a question or whatever? I mean, I don't think that that they couldn't be asked anything, or they couldn't have, brought the idea of that up to Moses or whatever. But
okay.
It seems like they were. It's probably more than we see in just reading the two-dimensional words.
Okay.
They're probably making a ruckus out of it.
Yeah, and one of the thoughts that occurs to me is, had they gone about it some other way besides just this complaining and moaning and groaning, would that have made a difference? I don't know that I know the answer to it, but it certainly seems like the attitude wasn't right in the way that they went about it. Okay.
And they don't want to be led. The Bible tells us Moses was the most humble person on earth.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Okay. Yeah, and that's an interesting thought, taking on Moses. You know, there's kind of a thin line, isn't there, between Moses and this multitude of people. I mean, in one sense, yes, he's exhibited God's power, but here he is speaking on behalf of God. If they want to revolt, I suppose they can revolt, but you see what happens when they enact some of that. Okay, good. Any other thoughts? All right, chapter 12 then. We also have an instance here. Who comes forward and issues another complaint? Okay, Aaron and Miriam. Now think of this, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. What do we know about those three? What's the history to these folks? First of all, they're what? They're related, they're siblings, okay? What about Miriam? What's been her involvement up to this point? Can you think of any instances where she's had something to do that has been noted in the narrative? Not necessarily on this occasion, but what'd she do way back when? Okay, when they went across the Red Sea, she led the women singing in celebration, didn't she? And then if you go way back before that, she's the one that kind of helped take care of her little baby brother there that was floating in the Nile, okay, as far as Pharaoh's daughter. So there's a little bit of a history of that. What about Aaron? Okay, so he was with Moses and called to go and face Pharaoh and to issue God's word to Pharaoh. And then he's chosen for a very important position as high priest. But on this occasion, what's the complaint? Okay. So, yeah. Okay. And it's kind of interesting, verse 1 and verse 2. Compare those two verses of chapter 12. They spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman that he had married. All right. But does that really seem to be the cause of the discontent? Seems to be something more than that, because they say, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And then this statement that Rick mentioned a moment ago, the man Moses was very meek. What's meekness? What do you think of when you think of meekness? You think of somebody that's weak, spineless? No. Okay, don't overreact. George, did you? Pardon me? Humble. Okay, yeah. Could use that as a synonym. So, you know, it has a strength, but it's a strength under control. It's sometimes defined as. So here's Moses, who is very meek. And so God says, okay, the three of you, come to the tent of meeting. And then he says to them, verse 6, if there's a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. And then he says, not so with my servant Moses. What's his point? What's he go on to say about Moses? Yeah, so I can speak to others in visions, but to Moses, I speak mouth to mouth. And it's pretty plain that I've chosen him as the one through whom I'm to speak. And he says, why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? So God's upset. And the result is what? When the cloud is removed, what's Miriam's condition? She's a leper. And so I think it's Moses intercedes and asks that that be taken from her. I think Aaron says the same thing, and the Lord relents. But not before she's taken out of the camp for 7 days, and then she's cleansed of her leprosy, and she's able to come back in. So, interesting, isn't it? Those two instances here as they're traveling from Sinai up to Mount Paran, or wilderness of Paran. All right, let's think about the next section here. Once they get up to the wilderness of Paran, and this is the one we're probably most familiar with, chapters 13 and 14. So what about the situation there? I think we all know the story. The spies are sent in. They come back. And they give a report that the land is great, but what? Yeah, they're giants. We're not going to be able to survive. So what's the point of trying to go in? In fact, why did we come here just to die? And of course, Joshua and Caleb are the two spies that say, no, we can take it. And if you look at some of that language there, pretty impressive in terms of some of the things that Joshua and Caleb say. Let me find it here, chapter 13. Notice the people in verse 27. Let me catch up. So there we are up there at Paran. There are the spies that go apparently the length of the land before they come back and give their report. They come back with a doubtful report. Verse 27, we came to the land to which you sent us. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Almost as if, who has the blame for this? You're sending us here. But they admit it flows with milk and honey. However, the people are strong, the cities are fortified, they dwell everywhere. And so Caleb tries to quiet them. Verse 30, let's go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Their answer, we are not able to go up against the people. They are stronger than we are. True or false? Okay. There's some truth to it, maybe in the sense that there are some people here that seem like they're pretty formidable. Maybe the Israelites in their own power can't do it, but what's the incentive? God's with us. And that's what both Joshua and Caleb are trying to say to them, aren't they? All right. And then down at verse 33, at the end of chapter 13, we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. I mean, they're psyched out, aren't they? So again, it's easy to read this and think to ourselves, well, yeah, they could have gone in, they could have taken that, but do we ever fight battles like these? Okay. So challenges come our way, and they look like we can't possibly overcome them. So what's the key in those situations, Derek? Okay. Yeah, having to trust in Him. It's real easy. We use that statement in 2 Corinthians 5:7, walk by faith and not by sight. And it seems to apply in this situation, doesn't it? They've gone in, they've seen everything, and it just looks like we can't do this. And sometimes things look to us like we can't do this. And yet not the secret, but the fact that we can is trusting in the Lord. Go ahead, Derek.
I was just thinking the last few years, there was a movie that came out about this, but the phrase facing the giants.
Okay.
A lot of giants in life.
Okay.
Some of them are very scary.
Yeah.
And some of them are concerning. How do I face that in my life? How do I get through that? But somehow, some way, because we will compete.
Okay. All right. So we have to trust in the Lord, and there are difficulties that we face. All right, chapter 14, the people get, they're discouraged. And then what do they resort to? I've got here rebellion. Yeah, okay. And they actually say in verse 4 of chapter 14, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. They're ready to go back. Think of all the journey they've been on, and now they're ready to turn back just when they're on the verge of entering into the land. So close, and yet so far away. And so Joshua and Caleb, verse 6, tear their clothes. They say this is an exceedingly good land. Verse 8, if the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land and give it to us. And then notice what they say. Verse 9, don't rebel against the Lord. It was rebellion. And do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. So the other spies are saying, we're like the grasshoppers. And they're saying, hey, these people are those that can provide for us. And yet, they're ready to stone them at the end of that section, verse 10. So Moses, as he has done before, intercedes. What's his intercession sound like in verses 11 to 19? Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, and he says in verse 13, the Egyptians will hear of it if you do this, if you destroy them, because that's what God seems to hint at, verses 11 and 12. I'll start over and make a nation of you greater and mightier than they. And Moses isn't having that. He asks God and says, you know, the people will hear of it. You've led them out, but you're not able to lead them in. Yes. And
raise up another nation.
right, exactly. So he wanted to start over. And he could have done that had he chosen, but Moses appeals to him. He appeals to his nature down there in verse 18. These are the words that God had spoken to him on Mount Sinai. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression. So, verse 19, please pardon the iniquity of this people. And so the Lord says, verse 20, I'll pardon them. So I'm going to forgive them, but what? There's going to be punishment attached to it, which is that they can't go into the land. They're going to wander 40 years, 1 year for every day that they were in the land. And then all of them, including those 10 spies, are going to die, verse 32 and 33, over those 40 years. Okay? So, pick up at verse 39. Well, here's the wandering in the wilderness. Verses 39 to 45, what's the reaction of the people? Yeah. And it's almost like they have a change of heart at this point. You know, we can't take the land. Now, okay, we can take the land. It doesn't make a lot of sense in some ways, but they go up and they try to take the land, and of course God's not with them and they're defeated. And that's not the last time we'll see that kind of reaction and that kind of result. Yes. Okay, yeah. Right.
Instead of doing this, let's go over there. Wait a minute, the consequence is not going to end. Oh, wait a minute, I think we can.
Okay.
Everybody wants the lesser of two. Right?
Yes.
Everybody wants to take the easy path.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good.
So it's one of those where, there are points, regardless of what life is laid out for you, regardless of the consequences that you're looking at, if you will stay with the Lord and get through whatever you're going, it's going to be best.
Okay, very good. Ian? Yeah, isn't that ironic how it ends up? The children are the ones that actually are able to go into the land, and they perish in the wilderness. So it's very interesting, isn't it? So part of this exercise is to see ourselves in all of this. Yes, they didn't do what they were supposed to, but can we do the same sorts of things? Can we make some of the same mistakes? All right, we've got a few minutes left. Let's talk about what happens at this point. More rebellion. Somebody tell me, what's the rebellion of Korah about? Chapter 16. Okay.
It seemed to me that he wanted to create his own, let's say his own priesthood.
Okay.
They had gathered, they had people, people that were following him and so on. So he decided he was going to confront Moses and Aaron.
All right, a little bit similar to the case of Aaron and Miriam, isn't it? Because it's an attack against the leadership that's taking place. And a likeness also, as we said in that case, with what they voice in verse 3 of chapter 16, you have gone too far, for all in the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. So his reasoning seems to be, hey, we're all in that kind of situation. We're all holy. Why is it just the Levites and Aaron's family that are serving in this particular capacity? Why are you exalting yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? So Moses falls on his face, and how does this all end up? What takes place here? What's Moses tell them to do? And apparently Korah has gotten about 250 of the leaders among the men, and some of these are not Levites. Some of these are actually from the tribe of Reuben. And so he kind of leads this sort of insurrection, 250 against Aaron and his leadership as his high priesthood. So what does, I think it's Moses that proposes what? Yeah, he says, get your censers, bring your fire, we'll put incense on it, and the Lord will choose who he's going to choose. And what's the outcome of all that? When they come the next morning, they're consumed. He says, get away from these people because God's going to consume them, which he does. Okay? And kind of an interesting outcome from that, what do the people do in response to it? They see Korah and all these that are swallowed up, and do they fall down in front of Aaron and say, okay, we've learned our lesson? Yeah. Look at verse 41 in chapter 16. On the next day, all the congregation grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, you have killed the people of the Lord. So imagine that. We've kind of revolted. These men have been punished, and now they're blaming Moses and Aaron for the problem. And as they do that, it says Aaron takes this censer and runs among the people, but not before a plague that goes among them and takes almost 15,000 lives. And then in chapter 17, we'll conclude here. What other indication does God give as to who is leading in this capacity? Okay, so he says, all of the tribes, each of them bring a staff, and then we'll keep the staff overnight, and the outcome of that is the next morning, why, it's Aaron's rod that's budded. In fact, not only did it bud, what did it do? Verse 8 of chapter 17. Yeah. Sprouted, put forth buds, produced almonds, bore ripe almonds. Then Moses brought it out. And God says to Moses, take this and keep it, and this will be an end of their grumblings. He's trying to teach them, again, this idea of subjection, submission to his will, and they've made some mistakes in doing that. All right. So we'll stop there. Next time we'll look at chapters 20 and 21, and then this last section. And I said here on chapters 20 and 21, more complaints. We've got a couple of other instances in which the people complain, Moses reacts, and on this occasion, Moses is in hot water for the way that he reacts. And he brings about water that they want, but he doesn't really reverence and respect God in doing that, and so he ends up being punished for that. So we'll look at that next time in chapters 20 and 21. The rest of the book concentrate on Balaam's prophecy, chapters about 22 through 26, 27, and then they make their way up toward Canaan, across from Canaan, and they camp there, prepare themselves to enter into the land, and that's where the book of Deuteronomy is going to begin. All right, we'll stop there. Thank you.